Alright, so now let's learn a bit about materials in Unreal Engine 5 and how you can make materials, how you can customize materials and all that stuff. Now there's something I want to tell you guys before we start this. Now realistically, as a game developer, you rarely create materials yourself because if you look at the structure of like a game development company or something like that, the task of game developers is not to create materials and it's basically to use different assets provided to them, different materials, different meshes provided to them to create games from, right? That being said, you need to know how to modify materials and you need to know how to work with materials, which is why it's extremely important for you to know how to create materials, so even though 99% of the times you won't really be creating materials from scratch, you do need to understand how materials are made so you can modify them, if that makes sense. And yeah, the reason why I'm telling you that is because a lot of people, a lot of beginner game developers, they sort of overlook the importance of knowing how to use materials. So I think it is extremely important that you at least understand how they're made. So let's go to, let's say, let me create a new folder. I'm just going to call this materials. Okay. And now what we can do is we can go close to our cube and we can basically, in fact, instead of a cube, let me just add a sphere. So I'm just going to go to shapes and sphere because that's going to, I think spheres just portray materials better. That's why they're mostly used for material previews. So we're going to be using a sphere as well. And, oops, my bad. Let me place my camera somewhere here so that we have like a good balanced lighting. And let me go a bit closer as well to the object. Something like that should be good. Okay. Now what we can do is we can right click in our content browser and we can go up to material right there. So if you click material, it's going to basically create a new material for you. I'm just going to call this material underscore tutorial because I'm just going to be showing you guys how material creation works. And let's save everything, by the way. So this button you're going to press to save all the assets, and you can also press Ctrl S on your keyboard to basically save your level and your progress so far. So let's go ahead and open this material. And what's going to happen is that if I make this full screen, you're going to see that we have on our left side, we have a material preview, and you can see that we have a details panel here. This is similar to the details panel right there. And on the right side, we have this sort of node workflow where we can create materials. So you can see that we have different sort of properties here, which we can either plug in values, like just type in values, or plug in nodes. So you can see that there's Unreal Engine uses a node-based workflow. The way nodes work is that you essentially take stuff, you essentially create nodes and then you plug them. So let's say I want to change the color of this, for example, right? The color of this material, that's the most basic thing. I have two options. Either I can click this thing right there, the color preview ahead of base color, and then I can specify any color and it's gonna, if I press OK, the material is going to become of that color. The other option that I have is basically have an image texture or a color texture and then have that node and then plug that into the base color. So I'm going to go ahead and add a color node. Normally the way you add nodes is by right clicking and then you have a whole bunch of options here and you can basically search for a node and add that specific node. But if you want to add a color, there's a shortcut for that. You press and hold the 3 key on your keyboard, number 3, and then you left click. If you do that, it's going to give you this node in which you can double click this and specify any sort of color. Let's say I specify this color. You can see that no matter what I do here, it's not really going to affect our material. The reason for that is because if I press OK, you're going to see that this node is not plugged in. So what I need to do is I need to take this and plug it into the base color. Once I do that, the value there is going to disappear. It's not going to exist anymore. And the base color is going to be specified by this specific node right here. So pretty much everything in like all the properties here, you can control with nodes. And I'm going to be covering like what these properties are and how you can sort of change them. Let's go over these settings for now. And then I can show you how to add image textures and all that stuff. So the first setting that we have is metallic. It's pretty self-explanatory. Basically, you specify how metallic your object is going to be. Usually, you either set this value at 0 or 1, but in some cases, to get more realistic results, you do have to use some values in between. But if I just set this to 1, that our object is now instantly more metallic. It just feels more metallic, And if I set this back to 0, you're going to see that it's much less metallic. So yeah, you can control your metallicness of your object with this value. Specular is basically how reflective your object is. So for example, if I set this to 0, you're going to see there's going to be absolutely no reflections. It's going to be completely matte or completely, like a dull surface. It's not going to reflect at all. But if I set this to 1, it's going to be more reflective. You can see that there's more reflections. Although there's a better way to control reflections, that is the next option that we have, which is roughness. I'm just going to set this specular back to 0.5, which is the default value. Now, if I set the roughness to 0, you're going to see it's going to become completely reflective. You can see that it's basically an orange colored mirror, if that makes sense. Like it almost feels like a car paint or something like that. So yeah, you can make this, or you can set the roughness to 1. That's going to make it super rough and it's not going to reflect anything. So for now, I think I'm going to set roughness to something like 0.2. Now, if you're new to materials in general, I would recommend you to not set the roughness value, or for that matter, any value, to absolute 0 or absolute 1, because in real life, even if you talk about colors, if you talk about roughness, specular, nothing is absolute 0 or absolute 1. It's always a range. So for example, if I want to make my object black, right? What I would do is I would never make it completely black. I would always make it like a really dark gray, if that makes sense, because that's going to make it look more realistic. Because in real life, as I mentioned before, nothing is absolute black or absolute white. Similarly, if I'm trying to make it white, I would make it a very light gray, like something like that. Now, yes, it's a minor thing. It probably won't matter as much, but it's just a good practice to sort of stick to realistic values. So similarly for roughness, even if I'm making the most reflective thing in the world, I would never set it to 0. I would always set it to the minimum I would go is 0.01. You know, because it's going to add that slight bit of, I want to call it a realistic effect, but I'm not really sure how to like describe it. But generally, I would recommend you to not set it to absolute 0 or absolute 1. I'm just going to set it to 0.2 for now. I think that should be good. Or maybe even 0.1. That's going to be good. Next up, we have anisotropy. This is not something that we normally use with materials, so I don't think you should worry about it for now, at least on a basic level. After that, we have emissive color. So emissive color is basically, you decide how emissive or how bright your object is. So this property would basically make your object like a light, you know, like a light source. So if I set this to, let's say, a bright green, you're going to see that our object, even though its color is white, it feels as if it's almost emitting like a light green light, if that makes sense. And you can see that the world around it is also getting dark because it's auto exposure and it's adapting to that. So if you want to convert your objects into lights, you can make them. You can add the emissive color property. Now, how exactly do you control the brightness or the intensity of this light? You're going to have to use nodes for that. So what we can do is we can press 3 on our keyboard and left click to create a color node. And then we can just specify any color. Let's say we do, for example, we do like red. Okay. So I'm just going to make it completely red. And then I'm just going to plug this into my emissive color. Again, it's going to be red, but we don't really have an option to control our intensity. So how exactly do you do that? The way to do that is basically to press 1 on your keyboard and then left click. And that's going to give you a value node. It's just a float number, like it's a decimal number. So it can be, let's say, 2.0 or, 10.0, whatever, it's just a random number. And what we're going to do is that we're going to take this color, we're going to multiply this by this value, and it's going to give us, and if you plug that answer into the emissive color, it's going to give us this color, but twice as bright, or this times bright, essentially. So that's how you do that. So you drag off of this and you say multiply, search for multiply node, add that. And in the B value, either you can just write your value or you can just drag this and plug it in like that. And now because this is 2, if I plug this in through the emissive color, it is going to be twice as bright. Okay, I don't know if it's visible or not, but let's say I set it to something like 20. Now you're clearly going to see a difference because it's way brighter. So I hope it makes sense. I know it's going to be a bit confusing for beginners, but the way it works is that if you want to increase the intensity of your emissive color, you take a color node, you multiply it with a float value, and then you plug the answer into the emissive colors, and that's going to give you the result that you're looking for. So that's how it works. And there's a lot of math in materials as well. Obviously, you don't need to understand advanced math for materials, but just sometimes it is good to sort of know basic math and like how sort of things work and all that stuff. But I'm not saying that you need to be good at math or anything like that. It's going to be pretty straightforward. After that, we have opacity and opacity mask, but they're grayed out. The reason for that, also I'm going to unplug this, by the way. So the way you unplug nodes is hold Control on your keyboard and just drag off this and just leave it there. Click off of it and it's going to basically just disconnect that node. So emissive color, I'm just going to set this to black because we don't want any emission. So now the reason why these are grayed out, the opacity and opacity mask, is because if I go to my details panel, my materials blend mode is set to opaque. that means our material right now is basically opaque, right? But for it to have an opacity setting, opacity you would know is basically how translucent or how transparent your material is. Your material blending mode will need to be translucent for that. So if you set it to translucent, so now you have access to the opacity option. If you want to just set it to something like 0.4, you're going to see that your material is going to become less opaque, but you do lose access to some other options as well, so you need to keep in mind the trade-offs. Now, the reason why you lose these parameters is because when you switch to translucent, what happens is that Unreal Engine internally uses a different shading model, and that model doesn't fully support properties like metallic, roughness, specular, all that stuff. So unfortunately, this is a limitation that we're having right now. There are some workarounds to this, but I'm not going to cover those in this course because this course is mainly aimed towards beginners, and those methods do involve some advanced techniques. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Just keep that in mind that if you set a material to translucent, you can't really have metallic, specular, roughness, all those things. And generally, like, you rarely have to ever use translucent materials. And even if you do, most of the times you don't even need these properties. So I think it should be good. I don't think it's going to be that major of an issue. Let me just set it back to opaque. You can see that there's other materials as well, other options as well. So yeah, but we're just going to set it to opaque, and that's going to be good for us. So after both of these settings, we have the normal setting. Now, normal is something that really makes your materials look realistic by allowing you to add imperfections to your materials. So the way it works is that obviously in real life, nothing is perfectly smooth, right? Like this, everything has some sort of imperfections, some grooves or something like that, you know? So those things you can add with your normal. Now, I'm not going to be covering it right now, but when we cover how to add image textures and, like, you know, multiple textures and PBR textures specifically, then I'm going to be covering normal. So we're just going to do that in just a bit. But for now, I just want to go through these other options as well. So tangent, we're not going to be covering because that's not really important for us. So after normal, the only other important thing that's left for us, at least at a basic level, is ambient occlusion. So ambient occlusion, what it is that basically it is the shadow produced when two objects are extremely close together. So let me just show you an example. So I'm just going to search for ambient occlusion, and I'll just show you a demo. So you can see that without ambient occlusion, this is how objects look, because they have shadow, but they don't have shadows of multiple objects being close together. But this one, you can see, looks a lot more realistic because it has ambient occlusion. So you can basically either turn on ambient occlusion for your material, or you can turn it off as well by you know, setting it between 0 and 1. But also what this is mostly used for is plugging in predefined ambient occlusion maps. So for a lot of textures, you would know where ambient occlusion would be. And so you can create a texture map, which would just have all the positions where ambient occlusion would be. And basically this would tell it where to add those shadows. So if that doesn't make any sense, that is perfectly fine. Everything will be a lot clearer when we actually import materials in this. So in fact, let's go ahead and start doing that. So now let's say we have like a brick wall or something, okay? How exactly do we add that brick texture to the wall? It's actually pretty simple. You just drag in image textures and then you sort of plug everything in, and it's going to look super realistic. So let's go ahead and start doing that. But for now, let me just apply this. And also, to apply a material to an object, the way you do this in Unreal Engine 5 is selecting the object. Then you go to your details panel. Inside materials, you're going to see this element 0 right there. And it says basic shape material. This is not the material that we want. We want this material right there. So you just drag it in, drag it on top of this, and just leave it there. And now you can see that our material has been applied. It's much more reflective and it looks pretty good. So that was our material. Now we can move on to adding different image textures. So let me just go ahead and add a cube, because we wanted to have like a brick wall, right? So I think a cube would be a more suitable object for that. So for this, we obviously need image textures. So let's go to the internet and find textures. So what I did was I went to the internet and I searched for PBR textures. Now what PBR means is basically physically based render. And it's essentially a bunch of texture maps, a bunch of images, which would make your texture look a lot more realistic as opposed to just having an image. So for example, if you look at this, you can see that there's like actual depth in this. You can feel like the material is actually 3D. This is what PBR textures are. And what we're going to do is that we're going to go to this website called Free PBR Materials. So if you go to this website, you can find a lot of free PBR materials which you can apply to your objects. So the one that I'm going to be getting is this one, Victorian Brick PBR material. I think it looks pretty good and the quality is pretty nice. So you can see that there's multiple downloads available. I'm going to be downloading the UE version. UE is basically Unreal Engine. They have a Blender version and a Unity version as well, but we're going to go with the Unreal Engine version. So once you download this, you're going to see that inside the zip folder is going to be a folder inside which we have a whole bunch of textures. So we have an albedo texture. Albedo is basically base color. AO is ambient occlusion. Height is displacement. Metallic is metallic, and normal is normal. And then we have roughness. And this is just the preview of the material. So if you open that, you're going to see that it's just an image. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select all of them, Control C, copy, and then I'm just going to be going into this UE basics folder, and I'm going to say, I'm going to create a new material, call it brick underscore matte material, and just paste everything inside there. And then if I go inside Unreal Engine, we need to basically import all those textures in here. So we can right click the materials folder and create a new folder, call it brick wall underscore wall. And then here we can drag all of these in like that. So we don't need the preview texture. So what we can do is we can just select that and delete it. Doesn't matter. And the rest of them, obviously, we're going to be using. So let's go ahead and create a brand new material, which we can customize and apply all these textures to. So right click here, and we can go to material, add that. And right off the bat, we can just select our cube and apply this material in here so that we can really see how it looks in real time. So go close to it like that. I think that should be good. And then we can open up the material and start applying the textures. So the first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to select all the textures. So select one, shift select the last one to select all of them basically, and just drag them in like that. And it's going to import all of them as image textures. So these image textures are also nodes which you can connect to the material. So I'm just going to be resizing this a bit so that we have more space to work with. And let's start with the first one, which is going to be the albedo. It says the name right there, albedo. So you take the RGB channel of that albedo and just plug that into the base color. And that's going to give you this brick texture. So you can see in the real one, it's not updated yet, but if you go ahead and press apply here, it should update. And you can see that already looks pretty good. It looks like a brick wall, but there's no actual depth in this. There's no like real it doesn't look realistic at all. So then we can go back and now we can plug all of these in. So this is ambient occlusion. If you plug this into the ambient occlusion, it's going to make it look more realistic. So you can see the difference is subtle, but it does make it look better. So just apply that. Now we're not going to be using the height in this because it is pretty resource intensive. You're going to need a very, very strong computer for that. And I just don't think it's necessary because it actually displaces the geometry and physically adds the texture. So we're not really going to need that. Next one we're going to use is the metallic. So plug this into the metallic like that. Doesn't really change much, but just add it. Next up, we're going to do the normal. I think the normal is going to change quite a bit. So if you plug the normal texture into normal, you're going to see that if I apply it, I want you guys to look at this brick wall and just see it change. So you can see now it looks a whole lot better. You can see the difference is literally day and night. It actually looks so much better. Let me go ahead and disconnect it and then connect it again so that you guys can see a difference. I'm going to apply it. So you can see this is what it looks before. It literally looks so flat and it looks pretty fake. But if I plug in the normal, you can see it actually looks real, you know, it looks a lot better. So normal is what makes things look a whole lot better. And I think it's probably the most important texture out of all of them. And lastly, we have, I think this is roughness. Name is right there, roughness. Yeah. So I can just go ahead and take the RGB channel of this and plug it into the roughness. So if I plug it in, if I apply it, you can see that it looks pretty good. However, in my opinion, it looks a bit too reflective. It looks a bit too shiny. So if you want to increase the roughness of any object, you can do that pretty easily. The way you do that is by multiplying your roughness texture with an integer. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to multiply this. I'm going to add a multiply node. Multiply. And then this B number, I'm just going to set this to 2. Because that's going to make it twice as rough. And then you plug roughness in and it's going to be more rough basically. So you can see that this is a lot better. And that is essentially how you add textures. I hope you guys understood it. I think it's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And yeah, you just take all the textures, plug them in, and that's pretty much it. So another way of adding textures in your scene is getting pre-made textures, or, you know, just textures which are already like the work is done for you already. So you can find those on Fab. So let's go to Fab. And here we're gonna, if I just look for, say, brick wall, we will find some brick wall textures. You can see that there's a lot of textures here. Some of them are paid, some of them are free. So let's go ahead and set the price filter to free. And now let's select this one. I think that looks decent, but maybe this is better. Not really. How about this? I think this is better. You can select your quality of the texture that you want. I think I'm going to go with high quality and then add project. Once you do that, it is going to import the texture, but it's going to be already made. So you can just go to materials and just apply this material directly here, and it's going to do everything for you. You don't have to like plug anything in like manually or anything like that. It's just going to apply the texture automatically for you. And I think it looks pretty decent. So yeah, I guess those were the basics of materials in Unreal Engine 5. I think you should be, I think you should have a basic understanding of how materials work in Unreal Engine.